Welcome to the inaugural episode of Field the Draft. I'm John Sirenitas, and I'm fortunate tonight to be joined by a man who I've known for a long time.
Yeah.
And I'm going to pump his tires here. One of the best football writers in America, in my opinion, my friend Eric Edholm from Yahoo Sports. Eric, how are you this evening, sir?
You read that script beautifully. Thank you for doing that. It's part of my contract. I can't, no. Very kind of you to say that, and thank you for having me on the inaugural episode. I'm excited. It's draft season, man. I mean, we're if we can't get up for this, I don't know what we can get up for at all.
Yeah, exactly. And especially because we haven't had a lot of football. Obviously, we really haven't had any football, of course, discounting the FCS stuff since the Super Bowl. So when it comes to the NFL, usually we were talking off air, you usually have a little bit more of a buildup. You have the East-West Shrine Game, Senior Bowl, of course, the Combine, and then you get into Pro Days. But there was this gap there between the Senior Bowl and Pro Days. So now it's going to start to ramp up with a month before the draft.
Yeah, and the greater emphasis on the Pro Days without the Combine is kind of throwing me off, because obviously I would usually, not to go too much about how the baby is birthed or whatever, but I would go from the Combine and immediately launch into my prospect rankings, whatever, and take all the information I would get in Indianapolis, spend like a week sorting through it, funneling through it, put it into my reports, and Pro Days would trickle in and I look at them. But like, you're right, man, this year has just thrown me off. My editors are mad at me. My friends are mad at me. My wife is mad at me. I'm just running around like a chicken.
I'm not mad at you.
The one still standing. I appreciate that.
Right. Well, let's just jump right into it. Obviously, this is a very intriguing draft class, as they all are in their own way. But just give me your overall thought on this 2021 draft class.
I mean, the big 30,000-foot view is the quarterback position, and I know you want to talk about that more in detail. But I mean, to have what's looking like a 5-quarterback first round is pretty rare. We had it a few years ago in the Lamar, Josh Allen, Darnold, group, whatever, Baker, and all those guys. And then we had it, I think, in 99? No, they had 99. We had the first 3 picks for quarterbacks. That's what it was. Mm-hmm. So we've had a couple years where, they've obviously been a huge story. But, if you told me that quarterbacks, after trades are done and everything, could end up the first 4 picks, or 5 of the first 8, let's say, I wouldn't be completely shocked. Obviously with mock drafts, it's hard to project trades and everything, but the quarterbacks are the big story. And then it's sort of who's the best defensive player in this draft? That's a question I've been grappling with for a while. And, maybe it's Micah Parsons, maybe it's Patrick Surtain. You could throw out half a dozen names, but to me, there's no Chase Young, there's no Nick Bosa, there's no, almost like sure thing on the defensive side of the ball. And then the third thing would be the opt-outs, just that factor that, that we're still kind of getting accustomed to. What does it mean? How much weight does that carry? So there are a lot of strange elements to this draft that I think set it apart from other years.
Yeah, and you mentioned the quarterbacks. Obviously, you got the possibility of 5 of them going in the first round. And in many ways, the draft is actually going to start at pick number 2 with the Jets, because I think we all know that the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to take Trevor Lawrence out of Clemson with the first overall pick, unless, of course, they throw us the greatest curveball of all time and we get caught looking for strike 3. Yeah. But I think it's safe to say the draft starts at number 2 with the Jets. If you're general manager Joe Douglas, what do you think he does here, Eric? Does he put a for sale sign on that pick as we get closer to the draft and they stay with Sam Darnold? Or do you think, they're going to take a quarterback there? Could be Zach Wilson, could be Justin Fields, more than likely Wilson. Tomorrow will be pretty telling with his pro day.
Right.
But do you see them moving the pick if the right deal came along? Or do you think that, they're going to hold firm and take a quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they've got to finish their evaluations on the quarterback, and they're in the position where they're going to get QB2 on their board unless they like one of these guys more than Lawrence. So either 1 or 2, which is a good spot to be in, right? And, if you can't find a great deal for Sam Darnold, you don't have to feel compelled to move him. Would it be a little awkward? Sure. But the idea is that if there is someone there that you love, you get the chance to take him. you know, to me, all these trade downs, they look great on paper, right? Oh, we got next year's first, and we got a third rounder this year, and all this extra stuff. I've looked back at some of these big deals. They don't always work out the way you expect.
No.
You know, people don't hit home runs with every single one of those picks. So paper versus reality ends up looking a lot different. So, you know, the question becomes how big an offer comes in. You know, is there another team out there that is so enamored with Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, whoever that may be? If you feel good enough about Darnold and feel like this new coaching staff can get something out of him and feel like he can come close to that first round status he once attained, you know, you have to at least consider it. But I'm guessing there's a decent chance they end up falling for one of these guys. And like you said, after BYU, I mean, Zach Wilson's a guy who's been pegged there, and it wouldn't shock me if he ends up being the pick.
Yeah, it wouldn't shock me either. I mean, in theory, if you're Joe Douglas, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to put a for sale sign on that pick, accumulate more picks, and continue to build that roster. Obviously, they have a lot of holes. And it's so hard, right? Because part of me feels like that's what they should do, because Darnold is so young. And you think playing in Mike LaFleur's offense, they move the pocket for him. It's going to be very similar to what Kyle Shanahan runs in San Francisco. He could flourish in that system. But the reality is, I think you're right. I think ultimately the allure of taking a Zach Wilson at 2 might be too much for them to pass up.
Right. And here's another kind of wild scenario I've cooked up since we've been talking here. Like, let's say
that's impressive that you cooked it up while we've been talking. That's why you're on the inaugural episode, my friend.
Instant offense. Yeah, no, but I mean, let's say they're going through their quarterback evaluations, and boy, Mack Jones really kind of intrigues them. You know, and I'm just picking him because the assumption is he would be the 5th one drafted. Again, I know we'll get to the specifics later, but let's say they say, you know, I think Mack's ready now. His floor, you know, could be higher than any of the other guys' floor. Like the other guys fail, they may fail hard, you know, whereas Mack seems like more of a sure thing. Why don't we trade down, take Mack, still get picks, you know, and we could maybe deal Sam as well. So there are a lot of possibilities out there. I mean, I like the trade down concept, but I think it's got to be a pretty big offer. They can't, you know, sell on 3/4 on the dollar. And I think they have to be sure that they're not in love with one of these guys.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And you brought up a good point earlier, too. There's no guarantee that trading out is going to result in future success. So they're in a predicament in a sense, because if you're Joe Douglas, you got to get this thing going. And you bring in Robert Saleh, and now's the time. And might be time to start fresh with a new quarterback. Speaking of the quarterbacks, obviously they've been the talk of the pre-draft season here, and rightfully so. I mean, this is as good a top of the draft as we've seen at that position in years. And we've had some pretty good quarterback drafts in recent years. If I were to ask you to rank them, how would you rank them? I'm assuming you have Lawrence 1. I could be wrong. But how would you rank these quarterbacks in your personal rankings?
Yeah, I do have Trevor Lawrence 1. You know, I mean, obviously there's been a little extra time to kind of nitpick and find little things that we don't love, but his combination of arm talent, athleticism, the total package, you can make every throw out there. He's not perfect, but I think there's so much to work with. And last year's playoff, when he took a beating, it answered that toughness question that had never been answered before. You know, this season we saw him play consistently better game to game than he did in 2019. You know, my list of positives has about a 2.5 to 3, you know, to 1 ratio to the negatives. I mean, the things that he can fix are correctable. So that's there's nothing he's really truly lacking physically, or it's hard to know about the mental part, but he's my 1. I feel pretty good about it. You know, I don't know if he'll be generational, but he's special. And I've got Justin Fields 2nd. And the questions that are out there are legitimate. You know, you turn on the Indiana tape, you turn on the Northwestern tape or the Michigan State tape. You know, there's some throws in there where you'd love to be able to sit down with them and say, you know, what was your thought process on this play? how did you read this and how did you execute that particular throw?
Right.
But I think the physical tools are really exciting. I think his leadership has grown from what I've been able to tell. He's kind of come out of his shell a little bit since getting at Ohio State. On-field presence is strong, I believe. And I think he has the most growth potential of anybody in this draft. You know, I think back to Dak Prescott between his junior and senior years. It was a big, big jump as a passer. That's where I could see Fields continuing to grow. So I've got right behind him Trey Lance as my number 3 quarterback because his range might be the biggest. You know, if he doesn't go to a good situation or if we're way overrating what he did in the FCS level, 17 starts, you know, the bottom could be lower than a lot of us realize. But the ceiling, you know, what his potential is, so exciting. So much raw talent. There's a platform with which to work. I just think the experience factor is going to work against them a little bit. And then just a hair behind him, I have Zach Wilson, Mack Jones 5th. But the thing with Wilson that scares me is a little bit of an injury history. 2019, the shoulder, broke his wrist, I also believe. Mm-hmm. And the fact that the last good defense we saw him play, I believe would have been off the top of my head, the Washington, like good, you know, top caliber defense. Nothing against Coastal Carolina. They had a great year. Mm-hmm. They're going to get probably 1 or 2 kids on that defense drafted. Washington game, end of September 2019. So, you know, that 2019 tape wasn't, it had some of the special throws, but it wasn't nearly as complete. So I have a little bit of suspicion on him while also admitting that, boy, he is a blast to watch. He's really fun.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of how I have him lined up with, you know, and Max, I think is going to end up being the 14th best starter in the NFL at some point. I just don't know that he'll ever be special.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point with Mack Jones because there's a lot to like. And I think a lot of people are knocking him in regards to the starting experience and the talent he played with there. Well, you play with who's around you, so you can't really, in my opinion, knock him for that. But I think when you look at him, I have a hard time believing he's going to be elite level. I think he could be a good, to your point, middle-of-the-road starter in the NFL. He would be in that. You know, he reminds me a lot of Andy Dalton when he was in Cincinnati. Not necessarily physically, but that's what I think his ceiling might be, career-wise.
Yeah, right. Andy Dalton made the playoffs 4 times. He was good enough to make Pro Bowls. You know, did we ever at any point think Andy Dalton was, you know, different? You know, I mean, like, I don't mean it like, did he have a special trait? No, he just kept improving at the little things until, you know, he hit a plateau and then slowly started regressing, you know. He's a great backup now, you know. I mean, I don't know what the Bears are thinking signing him, but I think that's
QB1 they tweeted out today, Eric.
I live here too. I got surrounded by Bears fans. It's pretty amazing. So
watch yourself, my friend.
Yeah, no, I know. They're good people for the most part. Yeah, Mack is just. And he tested better athletically than people think. He's got good. His vertical touch is really nice, but I have my doubts he'll ever be more than what you just described.
You know, I love Trey Lance, and I think physically he's probably the second most gifted quarterback in this draft, in my opinion, behind Lawrence. But I think, you know, the thing with him is there's just such a wide range, and you referenced this earlier. First of all, in my opinion, wherever he ends up, he has to sit for a year. Even if the temptation is there to play him, even if there's an injury to the starter, you have to avoid the temptation. He needs to sit for a year, and I don't like using this term, but he needs to marinate. He needs to sit, learn how to be a pro, and learn the NFL game. And I think one of the advantages he's going to have is he's coming from a pro-style offense at North Dakota State. So I think that's going to help him. But I think the physical tools are just so tantalizing. And I think he's a guy that going into this process, I think a lot of people thought, okay, 8 to 12 range. I don't think so. I think potentially, and you made reference to this earlier as well, he could potentially be a top 5 pick.
I agree. I think the Atlanta Falcons at 4 are a spot you have to watch for him, and be a little awkward because Justin Fields is the Georgia kid, right? I mean, I think they're in play for him. Are the Jets in play for him? I mean, that's a question. We haven't really connected those two a lot. I mean, I don't read a lot of mock drafts because I get biased, and it's just not good for my health, you know. So I wonder, you know, would Joe have the cojones to make that call? I mean, I get it. I mean, I have Lance this much behind Fields, and I think it's just because of the level of competition. But when you see Trey Lance doing some high-level stuff, you mentioned the pro-style offense. You know, they have some spread concepts. They have some QB run game stuff they do. But as a 19, 20-year-old redshirt freshman, Trey Lance, the kid that Minnesota and other big schools wanted to turn into an athlete, a safety, whatever, is changing protections at the line. He's making checks. He's doing high-level stuff that, you know, Paxton Lynch never did at Memphis or whoever. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just plucking out the first guy that pops in.
I got you.
Yeah. So, I mean, clearly the mental part of it, I think he's in good shape. He will get to the point where he'll be one of the more cerebral quarterbacks, and the physical tools along with it. How do you not get excited about that? He's got some mechanical stuff that needs cleaning up. You know, the top of his drops can be a little bit, you know, they're not what a quarterback coach would tell you to do. Are those coached out? We'll see. The other thing, the downfield accuracy, you know, he misses some throws where you want,
especially sideline throws. I feel he misses. Yeah. Yep.
The vertical stuff, you know, the deep third of the field, whatever. I mean, the outside of the field, intermediate. There's some spots where he can clean that up.
Yeah. Now, does Zach Wilson change your perception of him or where you have him ranked if he comes out tomorrow and he absolutely crushes it?
Say it one more time, please. Sorry.
That's okay. Does Zach Wilson move up at all? I'm gonna change the question. Does Zach Wilson move up at all in your rankings if he comes out tomorrow and absolutely crushes it, as most people think he will?
It's probably not going to change my evaluation. I mean, obviously the eye test is important for some of these guys, and it was a weird year for travel too. I mean, you know, like talking to some people around the league, and you know, some of the people didn't have the same travel flexibility to go watch some of these prospects, especially the general managers, the decision makers that other teams, that other years would have afforded rather. So, you know, the question becomes, if they're at this pro day and they're blown away and they confirm everything they've seen on tape, you know, is that the tiebreaker, the nudge, whatever you want to call it, the difference between taking him and not taking him? It could happen. All it takes is that one guy to say, "Yeah, that's my guy." I love
beauty's in the eye of the beholder,
right? And some of these pro days, it's really interesting too. I remember talking with a former GM now who went to the pro day of the quarterback he ended up selecting in the first round, and he said, you know, he didn't know it, but I was hiding on the other side of these like bleachers they had set up at the facility, watching him warm up. He said, so I was out of view, and I was watching him go around to every single teammate, give him like 10, 20 seconds of encouragement, move on to the next guy, you know, slap some hands. He said, you know, those are the things you never see on tape. He said, that kid didn't know I was watching. There were no cameras around. That was important to me to see that he was true leader, a good guy, you know, this and that. His teammates respected him. Some of that eye test stuff isn't just how they look in the throwing drills or how they move athletically. So it's a little different this year. It's hard to say whether one pro day, even as valuable as they are, can boost it that much.
Right, right. Well, obviously we've spent a good amount of time so far on the quarterbacks, but real quick, I'm assuming that at least 4 of the 5 that we're talking about are going to be in your top 10. But if I asked you to give me your top 10 in this draft, not your top 50 or 100, which it seems like we see out there all the time. But who are your top 10 players in this draft off the top of your head that you think are guys that have a pretty good shot of going, at least, if not in the top 10, at least in the top 15, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I think I know my top 10 off the top of my head. I may be off by a point, a place or two, but I believe it's Lawrence 1. This is regardless of position. Lawrence first. Kyle Pitts is my number 2 player overall.
Wow.
I mean, I love him. I can't help
What's not to love?
I know, right? I mean, his deficiencies aren't too much to get worried about, right? I'm not sitting there saying like, well, he may not be able to reach block on a DN. Okay, well,
right.
That's fine. He gives the effort up there. He's got some physical traits. So I've got him as my number 2. I've got Jamar Chase, number 3. I had to rewatch him. I had to go back and remind myself of how dominant he was. It took me a minute to get to that point, but I believe I have Fields right behind him at 4. And I think I have Waddle kind of wedged right in between Fields and Lance. So I think it's Lawrence, Pitts, Chase, Fields, Waddle, who I love. Again, another player I just
love the size.
Yep. And then I've got, and I think I have Penny Sewell 9 or 10, so that would leave 2 spots. Parsons is in there on the back end of the round of the top 10. Wilson we mentioned, and I'm missing one now. It would either be Patrick Surtain or Azeez Ojulari, or Jalen Phillips, one of the two. I mean, I have very close grades on them. So I don't know. How many is that? 12, 13? I don't know.
Yeah. So, we can work with that.
But that's where I'm at. I think Ojulari and Phillips are, I don't know that I would take them in the top 10. I'm not 100% on either one because of the experience, but both have some special traits to be my kind of co-number 1 edge guys.
Yeah, and you could certainly justify taking either one of them with a top 20 pick. Right. Definitely a top 25 pick. I mean, obviously. Gregory Rousseau from Miami is another guy that would probably be in that conversation, although he can play more. He's more of a traditional defensive end as opposed to an edge guy.
It's fascinating with him. I didn't realize, again, until I went back and watched, and I probably watched 5 of his games. I needed extra tape with him because there just isn't that much tape on him, right? So
he was an opt-out, and he was a converted defensive end.
Exactly. And what's crazy is a lot of his production came when he was rushing as a nose or a shade or a 3 technique, when he would kick him in on passing downs and get to the quarterback. And you didn't see him attack the edges as effectively. So there's a lot of debate on him about where exactly he's going to win in the NFL. And some people love his upside, some don't.
Yeah. And you love the length. I think when I look at him, the length is a big part of it. And if you're a 4-3 team or a base 40 front, you love having that length on the tight end side. If you can play him as a 9 technique and head him up occasionally, he could be a real problem on the edges.
That length, you mentioned it. I mean, right, if you're beating up on the tight end, I mean, that's a roll. I mean, that's a spot where guys can maybe not have the most impressive sack or tackle totals, but you're doing a job. You're taking that guy out of the equation and making it the numbers in your favor. So, I mean, his length is ridiculous. 6'7" with these vines for arms. Well-proportioned body, still growing. I mean, there's a lot of intrigue with him.
And he was a safety in high school, which just goes to show you the development of athletes nowadays, where you can transition from playing on the 3rd level to the 1st level and be an impact player that gets drafted in the 1st round.
Have we ever had a player go from high school safeties to somebody lining up directly over the center? Like,
I don't know.
You know what I mean? Like that.
Not that I can recall.
Right. It's insane.
It is. Now, everybody loves to talk about trades. And, of course, it used to be that you just did a straight-up mock draft and you moved on with your life. Now we're going into the 2nd round, the 3rd. Some people are venturing into doing a full 7-round mocker.
No way.
But trades are always the big thing. Now you're seeing a lot of mock drafts that have trades in them. So, with that said, what do you think are some potential hot spots in the top 10 where you could see a trade? What are some teams that could potentially trade out and create some legitimate fireworks on the first night of the draft.
Yeah, and you'll love me because I've never done a trade mock draft before. Like I brought it up to my editors a few years ago, kind of reluctantly, like, people seem to like it. He was against it. He was like, "No, this is the order. This is where we're going." I said, "Less work for me, man. That's fine."
Yep.
So, you mentioned the Jets. We kind of discussed them. Are they a spot? We don't know. Put them to the side for a minute. Miami at 3, I think, has to have the phones open. Like, it's pretty much going to be an offensive player if they stay there. I would think it's a pass catcher, right? Either, a Chase.
Smith or a Chase, yeah.
Devontae, yep. Waddle, whoever. So,
I mean, could they shock you and maybe take a Penei Sewell? I don't know if they would do that a year after drafting a tackle, but
they took Austin Jackson last year. They took Hunt. I mean, if you love him that much, I'm personally a tiny bit less enthusiastic about Sewell than other people. Obviously,
no, I'm with you on that. I agree.
He's on the ground a lot. He's got some, I don't know. I think he's got some strength issues that may need to be explored, but still a really good prospect. So
right, he's a guy that'll gobble up speed guys that can bend and lean, the Shaq Barretts of the world. Yep. But now when you start talking about those handsy types that can get their hands inside on you and double move you, and right, and then now those are the guys that I think he's going to struggle with, because I don't think one of the things that another guy that didn't play last year, right? But when you go back to 2019, I think he struggled with those guys that can stick him. He struggles to anchor, is my point.
Yeah.
He can't. I just feel, for lack of a better term, I think he's a little light in the arse.
Yeah, yeah. And what's crazy is that the staff there told us that they think he could gain another 30 pounds and not lose a whole lot. So he's got the ability to put it on. I just think he's sort of got a little bit of an undeveloped body at this point. But I mean, again, maybe he's Anthony Munoz one day. He's just not there yet.
Yeah.
But back to the trade thing. Yeah. I mean, Atlanta could move down, but I think they're sensing an opportunity here to take Matt Ryan's eventual successor. I just sort of have a feeling about that one. I don't know. Let's say they stay there at 4. Cincinnati's a weird one. They're not a big draft trade team. If Sewell's gone, I suppose it's a possibility. Pitts maybe is an option. I would say they're going to probably more likely stay there as it stands now. 6, Philly, I think lines are open. I would think they're at least going to look into moving down, especially if Jamar Chase isn't there. 7, Detroit is a spot where I can see teams wanting to move up to get that 3rd or 4th quarterback if they don't go, bang, bang, bang. So, yeah, that's kind of where you're at. I mean, I think Carolina, who most definitely would entertain the idea of a quarterback, they're at 8. And they're, I think, already having a look and maybe figure out who do we need to maybe leapfrog to make sure we get our guy if they're not in, Deshaun Watson. That whole situation's gotten so weird. So
right.
I know I'm just babbling a little bit here, but yeah, if they can't figure out their quarterback plans, they might even have to move up.
Yeah, I would think so. And it depends on obviously who they like. And you hear different things coming out of there. They like Trey Lance, they like Justin Fields.
Right.
It depends on, who they have as the number 1 quarterback on their board outside of Trevor Lawrence, obviously. Right. Speaking of teams that need quarterbacks, let's talk about.
You might ask this one. Go ahead.
Let's talk about the local football club, the New England Patriots. And boy, did the New England Patriots steal the show last week when free agency opened up. We knew Bill Belichick had a couple of things up his sleeve. We didn't know he had this much up his sleeve. Now, that being said, traditionally when we talk about Bill Belichick in the draft, of course, the talk around here is it's always a pessimistic view. Well, all right, yeah, he's going to trade down, blah, blah, blah. Now, Bill Belichick threw us a pretty nasty curve last week, and they went out and they spent a ton of money and checked off a lot of boxes when it comes to their needs. So my question to you is, Mr. Edholm, do you see any scenario that Belichick trades into the top 10 and positions the Patriots to draft one of these guys. Of course, keep in mind, he has never drafted a quarterback with a top 60 pick. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Jimmy Garoppolo, I believe 61 or 2 was the only
62.
one.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy to think. And he never drafted one in Cleveland that high, never did in New England.
Yeah, Eric Zion in the 3rd round.
Yeah. Oh, right. And I mean, past history says no way. He's not only never done it in round 1. He hasn't done it for the vast majority of round 2 as well. I think unusual circumstances demand unusual action. This free agency period certainly has borne out in a way that's been different than a lot of Patriots off seasons, as you mentioned. The doubling up at tight end a year after drafting 2, obviously all the other moves in concert with those. I wrote the next day after the first couple of days of them spending, I just said, everything in my brain is screaming, what's left? What boxes are left to check? I'm not saying they have the best roster in the league. I'm just saying that beyond Cam Newton, they have nothing at quarterback. I don't think Jarrett Stidham's very good. So that was my immediate conclusion. And I would, there's a scenario where Fields could be the 4th quarterback drafted, where, Wilson goes to the Jets, let's say, and then Falcons take Trey Lance at 4. Well, now you've got Justin Fields. Some teams have him as their number 2 quarterback, hot commodity. All of a sudden, the action would get very interesting right there. People would be calling Cincy, Philly, Detroit, 5, 6, 7 to try to get up there to make sure they get their guys. So, I think Belichick would wish that Patricia was still in Detroit so he could call it a favor, Hey,
right.
Make sure you deal with us.
Or Bob Quinn.
That can't happen. He's back in New England, but I think there's a possibility. I think the fallback is exploring a Jimmy reunion. Maybe I'm wrong about this. I don't think they would be as enamored with Mack Jones as some assume they would be. But if he was there at 15, somehow, could I see them taking him there? Sure. Yeah. I just don't think that scenario is playing out. What do you think?
Well, I think a lot of people are connecting those dots because of the Saban connection. And, and there's also a lot of people, including myself, that there are, and again, I have to be careful with what I'm about to say because people jump the gun and assume that I'm saying he's the next Tom Brady. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is that there were some college career parallels there.
Sure.
Brady had to play behind a couple of guys. Drew Henson, obviously. You look at Mack Jones. He plays behind Jalen Hurts and Tua. There are some parallels there. And, of course, he bursts onto the scene. He has a big year, leads him to a national title. Brady leads Michigan to an Orange Bowl win. So there are some similarities there. But I think that's about where it ends for me with the Patriots. And here's the other thing with Belichick. Belichick always has a long-term view. And I can also see a scenario where if they're sitting there at 15, if they, let's say, make the decision to trade Stephon Gilmore, if J.C. Horn is sitting there, who crushed his workout the other day at South Carolina, if he's sitting there, he's a tremendous value pick at 15. Belichick is a value guy. So I agree with you, Eric. I know that it's the – I've done it. I've connected those dots with Mack Jones. I know the Godfather, Mel Kiper Jr., has connected those dots in a lot of his mocks, but I don't think it's a slam dunk or foregone conclusion that they're going to stay at 15 and take Mack.
Well, here's my the point that I kind of built the column around from a draft perspective. They have 10 draft picks now. They were just awarded another one the other day because of a kind of a clerical error for the compensatory picks, but not 10 draft picks aren't making this roster. They already have 70 plus dudes. And again, I know some of those. The point is that, depth is not their issue. They could trade 5 of those picks if they wanted to, and even dip into next year. You give up your first this year, a second rounder next year, your third this year, and then whatever else fodder gets thrown in. They're not worried about the volume of picks. They've had a 3 or 4 man draft class a couple years back when they didn't have the first. They traded the first.
Yeah, when they got Derek Rivers and Dietrich Wise, and they drafted 4 guys.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but yeah. So I don't think they're scared of ending up with 4 or 5 or 6 draft picks because it's not an issue for them. In typical years, obviously they want to, fill the roster and everything like that. But I think a trade up is a strong possibility, even though it's, outside of their typical behavior. But, maybe they went hyper aggressive before. You mentioned Horn. I mean, that would almost be like the Vince Wilfork pick in the sense that they just great player falls to him and they take him because, well, Stefan's not going to be here forever. J.C. Jackson's got a contract situation coming up. This kid's really good. Let's just take him, and then I would applaud the move.
Yeah, I would too. And he profiles as a type of corner they like, that long, lengthy corner, that SWAT cover 2 corner that get their hands on receivers, reroute and play physical. Very similar to a Stephon Gilmore in many ways.
Absolutely.
And I'm not just saying that because they're both South Carolina guys, but similar type of player. And Belichick loves those type of guys that give him half-field flexibility in his coverages. And I do agree with you, Eric. I think that one of the things that we've learned thus far this offseason is that this isn't going to be a typical Patriots offseason. They spent a ton of money last week. I think they had egg on their face last season. They got embarrassed about going 7-9. I don't care what anybody says. I think Brady winning a Super Bowl nudged them even further into being aggressive. And I think that aggressiveness is going to continue. And look, given his age and where he's at in his career, if he has any interest in catching Don Shula and becoming the all-time wins leader, they need to get back on track. And I think it makes a ton of sense to be aggressive in the draft and try to move into the top 10 and get that quarterback, because when you look at this draft class at that position versus next year, let's say, right, and I think you'll agree with me, top-heavy this year. It really drops off after Mack Jones. Next year's draft class at that position, at least as it appears now, isn't as good at the top, but It's a deeper class at the position.
Yep.
So I think this is the year if you want to get that elite level guy.
I agree. Yeah, and one more point on Horn. I was thinking of I watched him on tape cover Seth Williams, big 225-pound receiver, Kyle Pitts. I watched him not handle, I shouldn't say that. I watched him cover Elijah Moore in the slot. I also watched him cover Devontae Smith singled up on the outside. I mean, does that not tell you, Belichick in terms of have a guy to cover a tight end, a slot guy, and an outside receiver? So, and then to your other point, I think it's exactly how I would describe this year's class. And maybe there's some intrigue in Davis Mills and, or the Florida kid. But, I mean, really –
Trask, yeah.
Yeah, Kyle Trask, I just blanked. But it does drop off. I agree. There's not 10 draftable quarterbacks in my mind. There's about 8 or 9. I think probably 12 will get picked, but you get the idea. There's not the depth. Next year, though, I agree, unless you're – massively in love with Spencer Rattler or, JT Daniels or whoever else.
Keaton Slovis,
Sam Howell. Yeah, I mean, they're all really interesting players, but none of them are Trevor Lawrence. None of them can get to where some of these guys have gotten this year, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. And that's why I think ultimately he's going to buck the trend. I think he's going to attempt to trade in the top 10. I mean, remember, last year they liked Justin Herbert a lot, and I'm surprised it didn't make a play for him, but I just think given where they were picking, the cost would have been too much. I don't think, obviously, the cost will be the same this time around. Now, you mentioned Kyle Pitts as being your number 2 player in your top 10. Who is your favorite player in this draft? Is it Kyle Pitts or is it someone else? And by the way, I have to say this to you. There's a rule attached to this. No Missouri guys. I'm kidding.
No Missouri guys. Gotcha. I would have to say it's Pitts. I mean, and again, I really like Justin Fields, and I think he's got some, Trey Lance fascinates me, but can I say he was my favorite player watching him? I think it's Pitts because, people knock his blocking. Oh, he's a tight end. I wouldn't take a tight end in the top 7. No, you don't do that. Right. What are we talking about here? Have you watched him split wide? Have you watched him in the slot? Have you watched him in line? Have you seen the way he attacks blocking? And again, is he the most effective one at it? No, but he's super valuable. I mean, let's put it this way. If he's not on the same type of level as a Travis Kelce eventually, You know, and it took Kelsey a couple of years to get to that level. If he doesn't get there at some point in his career, I'll be shocked. I think he'll at least, barring a rash of injuries, have that effect on an offense where, in the hands of the right coach, with the right talent around him, he could be a feature weapon. So, yeah, I just have very few questions about him as a prospect, you know, other than the bad luck factor. So he might be my guy. I'm just trying to think of another one that you mentioned. Horn. I mean, it was hard not to get excited watching him. That Auburn game was phenomenal. You know, there were a couple other games where you said to yourself, even though he lost that rep, I love the way he played it. You know, it goes down as a positive in my book. And so hyper competitive, super athletic, long, fits the modern prototype. He's an easy one to like, in my opinion.
I agree. And I couldn't agree with you more on Pitts. I mean, in this day and age with the spread offense and spread concepts having made their way to the NFL, 11 personnel is the predominant personnel grouping in all of football now, it seems. That tight end can no longer be your quintessential 6'6", 265 inline guy. It's got to be a guy that's a chess piece that you can move around. As you mentioned earlier, Eric, Pitts is a guy that can play in the slot. He can split out. He can play inline. He can play as a wing. That's why I think he's going to be such a desirable player, because of that versatility. I don't think organizations are going to look at him and say, oh, man, you know, he can't reach that tight 9 or that wide 5. I don't think we can draft him. No, they're going to look at his ability to generate matchups in all 3 levels of the passing game. And that's why I think he's going to go high. And, you know, you have him at 2. And I think we both agree. I don't think it would shock either one of us if he goes in the top 5. Like, for example, if you're Miami at 3, you got to give him a long look.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, they got their deep threat, right? They signed Will Fuller. That helps. You know, you get 2 other big targets back, and you have Mike Gesicki. So I could understand a discussion about, hey, is there too much overlap here? Wouldn't bother me a bit. I don't mind a bunch of big, talented receivers and one speed guy. I think I'm okay with that combination, right? So, you know, I think when we start getting to this point about team fits and specifics, you know, there's some discussion to be had there. But if we start making our decisions because, well, you know, we've got a pretty good young tight end who's super athletic, but, you know, isn't the player Kyle Pitts is, but we already got him, I think it's the wrong way to go about doing it. I really do. I think you have to adhere more to the talent wins motto. And so in my mind, Pitts shouldn't get out of the top 5 or top 6, 7 picks, but there's also a chance he might. I mean,
you never know.
The Bengals could pass on the Dolphins. It's a little weird. So
you'd think a team like Philadelphia, who seemingly hasn't really gotten it right at that position, and no disrespect to Jalen Reagor, but he doesn't appear to be the guy either, at least through 1 year. We have to give him another year. But how does he get past a team like that, especially because they're more than likely going to be starting Jalen Hurts? He could be Jalen Hurts' best friend.
Oh, yeah.
In many ways. So,
and Jalen Hurts,
I think should give a long look if he's there.
Absolutely. The thing about Hurts is, like, you know, the touch and placement and accuracy were always just a hair off in college, you know, and if he didn't have like these wide open looks and things like that. Isn't that the best thing you could give a slightly inaccurate quarterback? Like a guy with a
big target like that.
Yeah, he has body control. He can high point it. I mean, he's ridiculous. So he would be a great fit in Philadelphia, even if some don't agree with that, right? Yeah, like there are a lot of locals who are like, we don't need another Dallas Goedert. Well, this guy's a different dude. Trust us.
He's a different dude. And listen, and you see why the Patriots went out and signed Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry last week. 12 personnel is the toughest personnel grouping to have to face at any level of football. Because if you have 2 guys at tight end that are matchup pieces that you can move around, it gives you a ton of versatility because you can spread people out and they can be a factor in the passing game. They can be a factor in your run game as blockers. It gives you formation versatility. To me, a tandem of Kyle Pitts and Dallas Goedert, that would be bad news for the NFC East and the NFC as a whole. That could be a pretty potent tandem. K-Stone 06 checks in, and of course, He's asking this question because BC's pro day is tomorrow. Any thoughts on the local guys draft stock before tomorrow, Long, Richardson, or McDuffie? Hunter Long's obviously the best player on that list. What do you think of him and where he might go?
I like him. I mean, he made those catches where he did, adjust and catch it outside of his frame too. He's I think a little more springy than a Pat Freiermuth. He's still young. He's still. I think I was a little higher on him than the league was. I mean, there was an interest in him when I called around a little bit on him, but not quite as much as I thought. So I went into Senior Bowl week thinking he had a chance to be a second-round pick. I don't think that anymore. I would guess third, fourth round. I guess that's sort of based on the feedback I've gotten, unless people are really good poker players and when I ask about tight ends.
This time of year they are, actually.
Yeah, that's true. It's funny because a lot of my calls were made right around the Senior Bowl, and I do feel like there's a little bit more transparency sometimes the farther away you are. But you're right. The closer we get to it, it gets a little hairy. But I think he doesn't have the buzz right now that Tommy Tremble from Notre Dame does. So could he be the fifth tight end taken? Maybe. Could he be the third? Possibly. So he's somewhere in that TE 3 to 5 range, and I would guess, late third, early fourth, if I had to guess.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Pat Freiermuth. He's a Massachusetts kid. What are your thoughts on him? This is a guy who a year ago was projecting as a first-round pick. Of course, he was nicknamed Baby Gronk, and he, on the other hand, unlike Kyle Pitts, is your quintessential inline tight end. Your thoughts on Pat Freiermuth out of Penn State?
Yes, he actually played at Brooks Academy, and I was at the former Governor Dummer Academy, now Governor's Academy, I believe. So technically a rival of mine. That's all right. I'll let that one slide. But yeah, interesting player. I mean, I have a feeling he's going to end up being a pretty good, solid play. He plays a lot of energy. He's got little flashes where you see some Gronkian things, but he's not Gronk.
Gronkian. I love that. By the way,
Gronkish.
Yeah, he's very Gronkish.
He's not as Gronkish as I would like, but he's a little Gronkish.
He's more Gronkian.
Gronkian, right? He's got to improve as a blocker. He's got the ability to do it. I just think some of it's a little bit of technique. He gets high and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I would say his lack of, I know he had the big play against Nebraska, but his lack of big play ability makes me think he's going to just be one of those very solid station-to-station receivers who can make a little bit of an athletic play here and there. Good player, maybe like a less exciting Hunter Henry if I had to. He's not as gifted, I don't think, as Henry is. So what was Henry, early second rounder? So he's
out of Arkansas.
Yeah.
Next question from K-Touch 1415. He says, which position do you feel has the most depth? You can get quality players in late day 2 and day 3. So in-depth question here for you, Mr. Edholm. Your thoughts?
Got to be wide receiver. I mean, it really I wish I could give a better or a more creative answer, but for the second year in a row, that's a bonkers group of talent at that position. And we had some misses last year, some early misses. We don't want to give up on them yet, but it's hard to dispute that there wasn't a lot of receiver talent a year ago. This group might be better. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of like how you're describing the quarterbacks a little bit. I think the high end is a little stronger this year. I feel better about Chase, Waddle, and Smith, and maybe even Bateman, than I did about Ruggs, Lamb, and Judy last year. Just a little bit above them, But Rashad Bateman in the right offense could be great. Kadarius Toney is this, Swiss Army knife. Elijah Moore, I think, is really underrated. Terrace Marshall Jr. from LSU is a big, deep threat. Diami Brown can run deep routes. Dwayne Eskridge at Western Michigan, and on and on and on and on. There's so many this year. So I don't know what the first 3-round record is for receivers, but we could hit it this year.
I agree, and I think what you're seeing at that position is it's really a byproduct of the spread and how now you see guys are growing up playing in that offense. It's no longer just a college offense. They're playing in it in
That's
youth.
right.
They're playing it in high school, in college, and then of course you're seeing those concepts as I mentioned earlier in the NFL. And so I think in many ways, and I'm not trying to devalue last year's draft class or this year's, I think that that's going to be a position of strength in most drafts, just because guys are playing in wide open offenses now where they're more polished, they're more experienced, they're running more routes than they've ever have.
Right.
And while they might not be running the quote unquote complete route tree, they're still running a lot of routes because obviously if you're running the spread, it's all about getting max plays and getting those 80 to 90 plays a game. And so the end result is that guys are putting up big numbers. They're more polished. They're more ready to play. You mentioned a guy like Kadarius Toney. I think Kadarius Toney could be a sneaky good pick for someone from picks 25 to 32. I'm not going to say he's Tyreek Hill, but you look at a guy like him. You look at a guy like Rondale Moore, who tested out of his mind the other day. I love him out of Purdue. These are guys that, despite the fact that they're smaller guys, particularly Moore, can make big plays and add that element to your offense.
When I wrote my Rondale Moore report, I said, I've made it a habit these last 2 decades of never comparing any prospect to Steve Smith. This is the closest I think I've seen to Steve, in terms of just explosive. He looks like a little running back with the ball in his hands, runs angry, runs hard, runs fast, game-changing speed. Not big, 5'7", got to deal with it. There's been an injury history. We haven't seen him play a ton. He wasn't as explosive this year as he was in years past, but I would take him on my team 10 times out of 10. I mean, I'm just singling him out because you said his name, and I just, I wonder if some teams are going to try to make him a little bit of a hybrid, like Toney. You can use him in the backfield a little bit, put him in the slot, use him as a returner. I wonder if the height makes people a little bit suspicious about his ability to win, at the catch point, and because he's got a vertical jump, but we're still talking 5'7". There aren't too many 5'7" receivers playing in this.
No, and I think that the Steve Smith comp is a great comp. Of course, he was a little taller. He was 5'9", but I think you're right though, Eric. The versatility, and you saw it at Purdue when he was healthy. And he was a great get for Jeff Brom and that staff. Yeah. He could have gone to a bigger program, but I think when you look at the versatility and what you can do with a guy like that, you talk about alignment. You mentioned you can play him at receiver, running back, kick returner. Again, it's becoming a league of versatility now, and you got to maximize your roster spots. And a guy like that could certainly benefit your roster. Final question here for this evening. Diamonds in the rough. Everybody loves diamonds. Not just a woman's best friend. They're also football fans' best friend because they like diamonds in the rough. So who are 2 guys, offense and defense, that people might not know about that you're going to educate them on?
All right. I got a good one. Cade Johnson from South Dakota State. He's an interesting case study. He's Cade's study? Yeah, I guess. I couldn't help it.
It's getting hard, brother. I feel you.
Beyond loopy at this point. This
is why you're the inaugural guest, by the way.
I'm giving you some Gronkian moments, is what I'm doing, right? Yeah. If you turn on the Minnesota game from 2019, because he didn't play last year, obviously, you say to yourself, "Wow, who is this dude?" I mean, that was my first reaction watching it on TV. He almost scored 2 touchdowns. He was tackled to 1 both times, and not from behind. It was just one of those fluky things where he happened to go down at the 1. But, explosive ability as, on fly sweeps and things like that, can go vertical. Is he blazing fast? No, but his play speed is very good. He's shifty too. He's got some toughness. And if you watch the Senior Bowl, he made some catches on the sideline in traffic with a guy draped on him, toe tapping inbounds. You're going, oh my gosh, like how good is this guy? So I actually moved him into my top 100, all the way to about number 81 or 2 overall. Probably way higher than other people. I don't care. I love him. So I think he'd be awesome value in round 4. And if you get him in round 3, I'd fully endorse it. But he I think should have gone to, even if it was Nebraska or somewhere else.
Yeah.
And found a way to play this year. I think he would have really helped himself because he showed out. So that's one on the offensive side. I mentioned Tommy Tremble earlier. He's kind of a hot name in the scouting community, but we'll go. Let me think of another defensive guy. Sorry, I'm getting texts from a.
No, that's okay.
That's funny. I want to pick a good one Peyton Turner from Houston. I don't know if it's a sleeper. You've obviously heard of him, and I know other people have too, but maybe the people who are just starting to get into the draft haven't quite watched him. I think I was a little low on him. I had him in my high 80s, and I think I'm going to look a little silly by draft day. He's going to go higher than that. He was a 6'5", 215-pound athlete when he showed up in Houston. I knew a guy on staff when he was there. He said, Eric, he looked like a shooting guard, like a well-built shooting guard, but a shooting guard. We didn't know what to do with him. They just kept that packing pounds on him. He kept his quickness. Didn't do a lot in 2019 as, a good player, but not a great one. But this year, I think he really kind of took a step forward and showed some explosion. He could be your, you mentioned Rousseau, kind of that same, guy who can attack the tight end. He could be a 5-tech, I think. He's got really good weight distribution and burst. Maybe he's not a 12-sack guy, but I like Peyton Turner, and I think I may have shot a little too low on him.
I love the versatility with him, and again, I think that's so important on defense nowadays because gone are the days where you were either a 4-3 or a 3-4. That might be your base, but because of sub packages and you're a nickel most of the time, you need guys in your 6 or 7 defensive line rotation that can play in all situations. And when I look at Peyton Turner, he's a guy that to me can be that kind of guy. That, like you said, he can play a 5 technique for you on 1st and 10, and then if you get into a 2nd and long or 3rd and long, you kick him inside to a 2-eye or a 3 and cut him loose. And I think that those guys have a ton of value. I said it was the final question, but I lied, my friend. I know we go back a way, but I lied. Final question, and I promise you this is it. Final question. Give me one thing that you think could surprise people on the first night of the draft. It could be a player going higher than we thought, a trade. What is, if in Eric Edholm's world of draft expertise, what is one quirky thing that could happen the first night that could make us go, what? Wow, didn't see that coming.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Like, I was on Titus Howard being a first round, or I'll say this. I think I said, don't be shocked if he's going to, ends up being like a top 40 or 50 pick and he went 22nd or whatever. Last year, I don't think I had I don't think I made one of those kind of out of left field calls. Maybe I didn't, I forgot about it, but I'm struggling to come up with one right now. Those are the kind of things that I sometimes I'll get a tip from somebody, just say like, this guy is going way earlier than you have him or something like that. So the 4 quarterback thing I think is really potentially crazy. Like, especially if Miami moves down, either the first 4 picks or 4 of the first 5 or 4 of the first 6. We never had that before. We never quite had it that, the year where Baker, Josh Allen, Rosen, and Darnold all went that was close, but this year looks to be a little buzzier at the top. So that's probably a big one. I'll give you a good one. Let me think here. Let me just kind of scroll through. I think Jason Owe, after his pro day today, is a first pick.
Killed it.
Destroyed it. I mean, I still don't love him as a player yet, but I get why people would. Let me get one more good one for you here. So Caleb Farley, the corner who a lot of people had as cornerback 1, recently had a couple days ago, I believe, had this
procedure, right?
This Gronkian procedure, no joke. Rob had it twice. And he had those back issues for years.
Yeah.
What concerns me,
Brian OC100 jumps in the back surgery, he said.
The back surgery, right? I was going to try to think of microdiscectomy, I think is what it's called, but I'm not 100% sure. So what's concerning to me is he hasn't played a game in a year. Assume he's been lifting, working out, doing it, whatever. But why is that back flaring up? Because he had a procedure after the 2019 season. So he missed a couple games. They didn't say what it was for. He put a thing on social media, said, I'm having a little procedure. Everything's going to be cool. Fast forward a year, he's having the same type of procedure. John, that doesn't sound very good to me. Now, I'm not a doctor. No. My wife is, but I'm not. There's some real worry out there. And again, it'll depend on the medical evaluations once the doctors have looked at him. But we could see him fall, and I don't know where he's going. I'm kind of working on a mock that's due for next week right now. I don't know where I'm going to slot him. I don't know if he'll make my first round mock right now. That's where we're at.
Yeah, and you know, you bring up a great point, and I've always found it interesting because obviously you look at a guy like Patrick Surtain II, the name cachet, played at Alabama, a lot to like about him.
Yep.
But yeah, when you have a guy, you know, Farley hasn't played since 2019. You got the back issue. J.C. Horn has a killer workout. You can make a pretty good case that he's probably leapfrogged him. It'll be interesting to see how much he falls. If I had a surprise, I think it's Davis Mills. I think Davis Mills is going to go a lot earlier than people think.
How high you got him?
I could see him going early day 2.
Yeah, I think that's about right. Yeah. So, yeah, there's a story I can't tell right now, but I was having a conversation with somebody, and they asked me, where do you think he's going to go? And I said 3rd round. And they went, and I said, oh, is that too high? They said, too low. Oh, really? So that was my first kind of indication that, like, I mean, I thought he would crack the top 100, like, you know, 80 to 100. This conversation probably happened March 1st, February 20-something, whatever. So, you know, it's been a minute now, but still, that was my assumption. He'd go somewhere in that, you know, Cody Kessler range, you know, where he went. But I think you're right. I think he'll go ahead of Kyle Trask.
You know, and it's funny because I thought of him, given his limited experience, the injury history, I thought of him as a day 3 pick, probably 5th or 6th round. And I was talking to Dane Brugler, and Dane said to me, no, he's going to go higher than that, dude. And I think Dane was spot on. And now you're looking, and this was a month and a half ago. Right. And now you look at that trajectory since. And that's why I think he's a guy, especially because if Mack Jones comes off the board in the 1st round, there's going to be that team that misses out on one of those 5 guys. It's going to say, let's take a flyer on him. The size is there. He's polished. He's smooth in the pocket. You know what? Yeah, we'll sit him for a year, maybe even 2. The experience won't be an issue. Health will be fine. We can live with him. But I think he's a guy that's going to need to end up in a situation where there's an established starter that's on the back 9. If he ends up in a situation where he has to play right away, could be a bad spot. Brian chimes in about the Miami guys, and he says Rousseau, Phillips, and Roach. Any thoughts on those guys?
Yeah.
We talked about Rousseau already. So
we did. Yeah. Jalen Phillips, I don't want to say I loved him right away. I was kind of like, wow, you know, what a weird sort of circuitous route he's taken. Obviously, the UCLA thing. There were some rumors that he even loved football. Did he want to quit? You know, the injuries, all that. Comes to Miami. It was almost like he was an unknown again. I mean, the people who follow the sport and know recruiting rankings and things obviously knew him, but like watching him get out there and move and gain confidence, it felt like almost every game you just saw like a chip away at some of those things. You know, he's a better player than Greg Rousseau, in my opinion. Like,
I agree.
Right now, anyway. Yeah. So he and Azeez Ojulari, they're different, but they're really close on my board. I think Jalen Phillips, when it's all said and done, won't get out of the top 20. I was going to say 25, but why not? Let's be a little bold. He'll go in the top 20, I think. Oh, yeah. Quincy Roach.
Yeah.
Late 3rd, early 4th to early 5th. I don't know. he's not for everybody. His production's really good. He shows some electricity off the edge. I think a lot of teams are kind of saying that he doesn't play as big as they would like him to. I don't know. There just hasn't been a lot of buzz around him lately, but I could be missing out on something.
I agree. And again, I think it always goes back to what I said earlier, right? Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. But I think in this day and age, with those spread concepts being in the NFL and teams throwing more than ever, it's
no doubt.
It's no longer a 60-40 league. It's probably not even a 70-30 league anymore, pass-to-run ratio. You need those guys that can come off the edge and create matchups for you. And that's why you're going to have so many tackles go in the first round and so many of them go in the first 2 days, because teams obviously have to have an answer. But, Eric, thank you for taking the time tonight, my friend. It's good to see you. It's good to talk to you.
Yes, sir.
And let's do this again soon. I really appreciate your time, sir.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it, my man. Take it easy.
All right, brother. Good to see you, Eric. Thank you. Happy draft season.
Take it.